The hallway stretched endlessly that morning, filled with the usual echo of footsteps and lockers slamming. But for her it felt like walking through a tunnel, where every sound sharpened against her quiet presence. She moved with her usual calm, her hands holding her notebooks close to her chest, her breathing steady in the way her father had taught her. Slow, controlled, letting the world's noise pass through her instead of sticking to her. The students around her buzzed like restless insects, whispering behind cupped hands, nudging each other as she passed, throwing the same tired insults that had shadowed her for months. Weak, scared, fragile. The words were meant to pierce, meant to provoke, but she carried herself like someone who had long ago learned to treat cruelty like weather, unpleasant, but powerless if you refused to shiver. Still, the bullies were persistent, circling her with growing confidence, emboldened by the silence they mistook for surrender. One of them, a tall boy who enjoyed performing for his audience, slapped her books out of her hands, sending papers fanning across the hallway floor as laughter erupted like a spark catching dry grass. She knelt down, not with shame or panic, but with an eerie calm that unsettled a few who happened to look closely. Her father's lessons whispered from memory. Never react to the first strike. Make them believe you're harmless until the moment you decide otherwise. She picked up each sheet slowly, methodically, ignoring the shoes nudging the papers farther away, ignoring the taunts, ignoring the hallway that had become a stage for the cruelty of those who thought they were untouchable. When she finally stepped into class, the bullying only intensified. They pulled her chair when she sat, tossed erasers at her back, whispered threats meant to make her flinch, to make her cry, to push her into the same fearful corner they believed she belonged in. But she remained composed, almost unnervingly so, her face an unreadable surface hiding a mind that was counting breaths, measuring distances, observing behaviors the same way her father once told her special forces scouts observed enemy movements before choosing the perfect moment to act. To her classmates, she looked passive. To anyone trained, she would have looked like someone who had not frozen under pressure, but someone quietly preparing, calm before a controlled and inevitable storm. The classroom felt like a sealed box where every whisper bounced off the walls, and every cruel laugh pressed closer, but she continued to sit with the same quiet steadiness, her gaze lowered just enough to appear harmless while her mind mapped every movement around her. The bullies grew bolder, sensing no resistance. One tapped the back of her head repeatedly with a pencil. Another kicked the leg of her chair every few seconds, and the ringleader leaned in close enough for his breath to brush her ear, as he muttered threats about what would happen after school. They believed she was cornered. They believed she was afraid. But beneath her stillness, something shifted, something her father had spent years shaping with discipline instead of rage, clarity instead of panic. She remembered the long nights in the backyard where he made her repeat the same drills until her muscles reacted before her thoughts did. The lessons about timing, patience, and reading the intentions of others through the smallest details, a tightening jaw, a shifting stance, a glance exchanged between aggressors. She recognized all of those signs now. When the ringleader finally reached over and tried to snatch her notebook directly out of her hands, she didn't hesitate. Her grip tightened, her shoulders dropped into balance, and in one smooth, reflexive movement she twisted his wrist, just enough to make him yelp without causing real injury. The room fell silent, shock spreading across faces that had expected her to break, not respond with precision. He stumbled back, clutching his wrist, anger swelling to replace his surprise. But she rose slowly with a calm that no one could understand, not knowing it came from a childhood spent training under a man known in military circles only as the Ghost. The other bullies stepped forward instinctively, but she shifted her stance slightly, grounding her feet the way her father taught her. Quietly ready, not aggressive. And as they moved in, she reacted with controlled, efficient motions, redirecting a shove into a stumble, sidestepping a grab, leaving each of them disoriented, embarrassed, and suddenly aware that the girl they had mocked as weak had just dismantled their confidence in front of the entire class. She didn't brag, didn't threaten, didn't even raise her voice. She simply sat back down, breathing steadily, while the room buzzed with disbelief. The bullies retreated to the back, red, faced and humiliated. But humiliation has a way of curdling into something darker, and as they exchanged bitter looks, she knew, long before they did, that this wasn't over. The rest of the day unfolded beneath a thick, uneasy tension, the kind that settles over a place when pride has been wounded, and someone is searching desperately for a way to get it back. She walked through the halls with the same calm steps as before, but she could feel eyes on her, whispers no longer mocking, but confused, startled, shaken by what they had seen in the classroom. The bullies kept their distance at first, huddled near the lockers in a tight circle, speaking in hushed voices that carried just enough for her to understand the tone, even if she couldn't hear the exact words. There was anger in the way their shoulders stiffened, in the glances they threw at her, in the way their leader's jaw clenched each time he replayed the humiliation in his mind. But beneath that anger she sensed something else too. Shame, the dangerous kind. The kind that doesn't fade but instead festers and searches for an outlet. She didn't need to hear them to know they were planning something. She saw it in the way one of them kept checking his phone, in the way another walked away early to make a call, in the way the ringleader smirked with the strained bravado of someone who had found a bigger shadow to hide under. By the end of the last period, she already knew they were going to try again. Her father had taught her to recognize the patterns. People who relied on groups, who needed their friends behind them to feel powerful, who mistook numbers for strength, but she didn't expect how far they would take it. When she reached the restaurant where she worked evenings, the familiar chime of the door gave her a brief sense of comfort. Warm lights, the smell of grilled food, the distant clatter of dishes. Yet even as she tied her apron, she couldn't shake the instinctive alertness rising inside her. Her father used to tell her that danger often arrives disguised as silence, and she felt that silence now, a thick pause between breaths like the world was holding something back. Hours passed, customers came and went, but outside she caught glimpses of movement, shadows gathering near the parking lot, footsteps lingering too long by the window, and then the unmistakable sight of the bullies returning, but not alone. They had brought older boys, bigger boys, men who carried themselves with the careless swagger of people who thought rules didn't apply to them. Brothers, cousins, street-level troublemakers who lived for moments like this, moments where numbers created the illusion of invincibility. They didn't know she had been trained to expect this exact escalation. They didn't know her father had prepared her for the moment when bullies stopped being children. They didn't know that walking into the restaurant that night would bring them into the silent territory of someone the military once whispered about with a mixture of respect and fear. A man known only as the Ghost, and as their silhouettes crowded around the entrance, ready to teach her the lesson they believed she deserved, she stood behind the counter with a calm that none of them could understand. Because she felt something rising behind her, like a shift in the atmosphere, a presence she recognized immediately. Her father had arrived. Her father stepped into the restaurant without a sound, the kind of entrance that seemed ordinary to anyone who didn't know him. But to her, it was as unmistakable as thunder rolling in. He wore simple clothes, nothing that hinted at the life he once lived, yet the air changed the moment he crossed the threshold. The workers glanced up, sensing something they couldn't name, and even the customers paused mid-conversation as if a shift in gravity had passed through the room. He saw her, saw the tense way she stood behind the counter, saw the shadows gathering outside the glass doors, and in that quiet glance between father and daughter, he understood everything without a single word being spoken. The Ghost had always read danger the way others read weather. One look at the faces lurking outside and he could already map their intentions, their confidence, the reckless assurance of boys who believed numbers made them wolves. He didn't confront them immediately. Instead, he walked to her station, lifted his hand, and gently adjusted the knot in her apron. A small gesture, but one that grounded her, reminding her of every time he taught her to face fear with breath, not adrenaline. His voice, when he finally spoke, was calm, so calm it almost seemed out of place. "You handled the first wave," he murmured softly. "Let me handle the second." Before she could respond, the doors swung open and the group of bullies poured in loud, posturing, full of the false bravado of people expecting an easy show of dominance. They didn't notice her father at first, they were too focused on her. But then one of the older boys stepped closer and found himself suddenly locking eyes with a man whose gaze held no fear, no hesitation, no confusion, only a cold, unreadable stillness that made something instinctive inside him flinch. The leader puffed his chest anyway, trying to regain ground, throwing out threats meant to intimidate. But her father took a single step forward, and the entire restaurant seemed to shrink around his presence. He didn't raise his voice, he didn't have to. His silence carried a weight that pressed into the bones of anyone paying attention. His posture was relaxed, yet his stance was perfect. Balanced, rooted, controlled. Soldiers had once whispered stories about a man who moved like smoke and struck like a shadow, A man who could dismantle an entire room without wasting a breath. They called him the Ghost because no one ever saw him coming until it was already too late. And now, standing between his daughter and the gang that thought they owned the night, that reputation, long buried, rose around him like a storm waiting for someone foolish enough to walk into it. The room fell into a tense, suffocating quiet as the group finally realized the man standing between them and their target wasn't just a father. He was something far more dangerous, something their instincts understood, even if their minds hadn't caught up yet. One of the older brothers tried to push forward, muttering that this was family business, and the man should step aside. But the moment he reached out, her father intercepted the motion with a speed so controlled it looked almost effortless. His hand closing around the boy's wrist with gentle precision, not squeezing, not twisting, just holding. Yet the bully froze completely, because within that touch he felt the unmistakable sensation of being completely overpowered by someone who wasn't even trying. The Ghost released him without a word, but it was enough to send a flicker of uncertainty through the entire group. Still, pride is a stubborn poison, and humiliation burns hotter than fear. The ringleader, desperate to recover some sense of dominance, lunged with a swing meant more for show than impact. What followed didn't look like a fight. Fights are messy, loud, chaotic. This was something else. A shift of weight, a small sidestep, a redirected limb, a controlled momentum break. In the span of a few blinks, 3 of the boys found themselves on the floor, not injured badly, just disarmed of their confidence, staring up at a man who had moved through them like wind slipping past leaves. He didn't strike them. He didn't shout. He simply dismantled every attempt they made with quiet, terrifying precision. And when the biggest brother stepped forward, the one who thought his size was enough to intimidate anyone, the Ghost merely looked at him, not with anger, but with a calm disappointment that cut deeper than any threat. Strength, he said quietly, is not in numbers or fists. It's in control. Then, almost gently, he stepped aside and let the man charge. The Ghost didn't even counterattack. He guided the momentum, turning the man's aggression into his own downfall, setting him on the ground with a single controlled motion that left the bully stunned, confused, and breathless. By now, the gang's bravado had evaporated completely. Customers watched in awe, her coworkers frozen in disbelief, and she stood behind the counter, her heartbeat steadying as she witnessed the man she admired most reveal a fraction, just a fraction, of the legend he once was. Slowly, the bullies scrambled to their feet, their arrogance shattered, their faces pale with the realization that they had nearly crossed a line no one walks away from. Her father didn't chase them. He simply looked at them with that same quiet, unshakable calm, and something in that silence made them retreat faster than any punch ever could. As they stumbled out into the night, he turned back to her, eyes softening, the storm inside him settling. "You stood your ground," he said quietly. "I'm proud of you." And for the first time that day, she let the calm she had fought to maintain melt into a small, relieved smile, because now the truth stood clear in her mind, and in the minds of everyone who had witnessed the night's silent storm. She was never weak. She was never fragile. She was the daughter of the Ghost. And she carried his strength not in violence, but in the quiet power to stand steady, even when the world tried to break her.